Hello, everyone. So our 15-minute break kind of turned into a 45. I think we started like 10, 15 minutes before, and we're getting started again right on time. So we're going to take a brief break from artificial intelligence, big data, and the technological innovation. This, I think, is going to be a very interesting conversation. And I know because when I first met William, it was a very interesting conversation. And I was fascinated not just by what they do, but how they do it and their segment. And an important part of the conversation is going to be around the topics of something that we discuss formally and informally, which is, are we a generalist or are we a specialist within our segments? And whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing. So I'd like to introduce William Vanderbloemen, and we'll start our fireside chat. We have a bio, but I think that it would be more interesting if we kind of work through William's background and let him start telling us about. Well, first, tell us about yourself, William. How your life started professionally and how you ended up in this business of ours.
Thank you. The best thing to know about me is my wife, Adrian, who's actually here. And if you meet her, then you'll think more highly of me.
Okay.
But I wandered into search. It's not something that I set out to do. Didn't even really know about it. I grew up with a very entrepreneurial bent, and then in college had a very, why are we spending money on you at college sort of experience, sort of the waste your youth sort of thing, and then had a faith awakening, and that led me to going into ministry. So I was a pastor for, 15 years. And I guess pastors are trusted slightly less than search consultants. But it was a fun time, and the type of church I served, the Presbyterian church, had a real scarcity of talent. 93% of the clergy are over 40. So not many young people. And at 31, I was asked to go serve the congregation, First Presbyterian of Houston, which is where I live now. And that church is where Sam Houston went to church. So it's been there a while. And after that part of life, I went into the corporate sector, worked for an oil and gas company. If you're around Houston, you know Anadarko. If you're not, you probably don't. But it's Fortune 200 or so. And while I was there, they went through a CEO transition. The previous CEO had been there 9 years, which you guys know is kind of a lifetime at that size company. They had a seamless transition to the new CEO, who's still there 10 years later. And it took about 100 days. And I looked at that and I thought, oh my goodness, because in the church that I served, First Presbyterian, which is a bit of a kind of a brass ring, just to talk about them and not me. It's a great sort of catch, should be easy to fill. They took about 3 years to find me. I was there not quite 6, and they took 2.5 years to find my successor. So 11-year span, half the time search, half the time with somebody. And I thought, oh my goodness, could we build something for the church that is as elegant as what I saw at Anadarko? And so Adrian and I had just gotten married, and we just bought a house. We're blended, so we have 6 kids. And I came home from this great job.
Who married you? Who married you, just for kicks?
Oh, it took 2 pastors to marry us. We had the president at Princeton Seminary, who's where I went to school and also a family friend. And then this guy named Joel, who's a pastor in Houston.
Joel who?
Osteen, yeah. So I have a strange collection of friends.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I came home from work and said, I think I'm supposed to quit my job and start something new for churches. And Adrian looked at me and said, that's because churches just love new ideas, right? And I don't think anyone's ever said that. So quit my job, and it was the fall of 2008, which was a brilliant time to quit your job and start a small business. And we started on a card table with no debt, no venture cap, no money to get going other than what we had in the bank. And now 10 years later, it's a different day. So the short version is churches hire us to help them find their pastor. So it's pretty niche. Now it has expanded some. As board members of churches see what we do, they think, yeah, I might want to hire you for our business to do a search as well. But the backbone of what we do is, I don't know that it gets a whole lot more niche than that one little space. At the same time, we have to be generalists, because we'll get asked to do a search for something we've never even heard of before, but the client says, yeah, but you know our DNA, and that's the important part. So we'll trust you to figure out all the other little pieces of whatever the sector is.
So funny thing, when I met William, I asked him if he was a specialist or not, and he said no, he was a generalist. And you would imagine that being such a specific niche, that this would be a two-person operation. But tell us about the size of your operation, your head count. How many searches do you complete each year?
Yeah, so I can give you the answer that a senior pastor would give, which would be like this, or I can give you the real answer. The lowest number I can say is we have right at 40 full-time employees. We also have probably a dozen 1099s that we use for specialty things here and there. So if you want to make it sound big, you can say over 50. If you want to make it sound real, it's about 40. And we're old school, central office, make people come to Houston, live there for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is our culture and the way we're trying to build a team that can do scalable, repeatable work. Because I think we are now at, I think this year we'll probably complete somewhere just shy of 300 searches. So
that's what amazed me. I mean, if we all know the number of people that we have, working, and I think maybe William says he doesn't come from search. For him, it was just like, no, I'm not a specialist. We only have about 50 people. Well, we only complete about 300 searches within this highly specific, highly specialized niche. So that was really amazing. Tell us a bit more about how you see your process as different from other executive search processes.
Well, I think for us, so we started out, we took off very quickly. And I think, frankly, it was fortuitous that we started in 2008 when things were slow, or we would have oversold what we could have delivered. So we had some time to start to learn the craft and got around some people that have been in search a long time. So, but early on, we did what I hear a lot of firms do. We went to people with industry experience. Okay, you've been a pastor for 10, 15 years. You've got a great network. Why don't you come join us? And that was good. It worked. It didn't scale. And the opportunities have been coming in much faster than I can go find somebody who's been in church for 10, 15, 20 years and wants to leave church but still help churches. People that want to leave church usually don't want to talk to the church again. But so it got to a place where we had to say, how can we build talent development so that we have, 7.5 million people in the Houston metro area or something crazy like that. Yeah. We ought to be able to find some people that can do this work. Can we build a system that will scale? And now today, one of our consultants that gets the highest ratings from clients is a woman who has never worked a day on a church staff and is doing senior level searches, and by the way, is a woman in an industry that is not typically run by women. So I think we're learning how to build system and scale. A lot of that goes back to a lot of software disruption that, frankly, we started so new that we didn't know the old way of doing search, and we weren't cluttered by it. So we just kind of figured it out as we went, and have done a lot more automation than I think might be normal.
So what's the percentage split of your time between executing search projects, just selling, and focused on making the firm better?
My time?
Your time, yeah.
The answer I'm supposed to say is I don't do searches anymore. There are a few here and there that I'll take on. Everybody knows the baby boomer retirement phase is happening, And there are a lot of really large churches that started about 30 years ago, and the founders are retiring. And when those guys need long-term succession planning, I'll end up handling churches north of 10,000 in average Sunday attendance with a pastor who's been there a long time. That would be a candidate for me actually handling the succession work. But even then, I'll bring a consultant along that does the real work. And there are only, I don't know, 55 of those in the United States, and we probably represent 35 or 40 of them. So it's that one little piece. I wrote a book on succession planning 4 years ago, and my mother thought she was going to have to buy all 10 copies. But turns out...
because it was succession planning for church.
For churches,
It was specific to churches.
She's like, you're going to write a book about what? She really thought she was going to have to buy all the copies. But I think we've sold 35,000 copies or so in English, and it's kind of caught on. And since, if you put your name on a book, then people want you to do the work. So that would be the one piece of client work. Anymore, it's a lot of writing. It's a lot of brand ambassador. We just released a new book on workplace culture, team cultures. It's called Culture Wins. If you just Google Vanderbloemen, frankly, we didn't want to name the firm after me, but the SEO consultant we hired said, your last name is so screwed up that you can mistype it 100 different ways into Google and it'll still drive back. So we went with that. So, just type it however you want and you'll find it. But I spend a lot of time writing, a lot of time speaking. I have 5 direct reports, and frankly, Adrian and I tag team how they report to us. If it's a vision or direction question, like how would you solve this problem, they'll come to me. If it's a how do I get this resource and actually get something done, they go to Adrian. So that's not a very clean answer to your question, but it's very little client-facing work anymore.
So of the 300 searches that you do per year, how many are you involved with directly?
What am I handling? About 2 right now? Yeah, so what, maybe 6 or 8 in a year?
Okay.
Maybe.
Next, I think as boutique firm consultant and especially owners, I think one of our biggest issues is always, clients want to talk to us and we really struggle in bringing other team members in, and we see it as some clients might see it as not being so important because the person who has the name on the door is not helping them with the search. Beyond that, you have focused on a reputation that is built behind your thought leadership. How do you handle that? How do you handle the because it's within that specific niche, you carry some weight.
Well,
when you start a search, how do you deal with that? Why are you not going to help me?
Well, I think I've hired people smarter than me, so that's good. And that didn't take a lot of work. But I also think our content-based marketing has been the absolute backbone of how we've gotten our name out there. There's a huge gap in what you learn in seminary and what you actually need to know to run a staff meeting or to hire or fire or do anything. So knowledge gap was there. We were able to step into it at the right time, and we've become sort of a thought leader. But what you won't read on the web about us is you have to produce content for us if you're going to work with us. So like even if you're interviewing for us, one of the last pieces of your interview is likely we're going to ask you to write a blog post, and we're going to see how the traffic does. If you can't produce content, you're probably not going to be very happy at our firm. So I think by diversifying where the content comes from, where it's not all from me, has allowed the thought leadership to be brand wide and not personality driven. And we've gotten to a place now where I actually heard one of our salespeople say the other day on a call, oh, no, you really don't want William to run your search. That wouldn't be as good as... So hopefully that's a good thing.
Yeah, and with 40 people, the office it's a really nice office, very open environment, and they do actually have a room that's focused on video production. It's and blog production, right? It's right next to your office, so it is an important part of the brand awareness.
Well, I think what we've tried to do through that is not just put content out for the heck of it, but we had to create an industry. Churches were not used to thinking about hiring a search firm, and they're not very change friendly. And so we're going to sell you on an industry and an idea, and then we're going to sell you on us as the solution for that idea. So we decided from day one, we'll do whatever we have to do to not be thought of as a vendor, to not be called that four-letter word, headhunter, right? But to be thought of at a little higher level probably means we passed on some work in the beginning that we could have taken on if we wanted to do more faster. But I think it's put us in a spot of sort of trusted advisor as opposed to vendor or transaction.
So for those of us that have been in search trying to grow our firms, from zero to where you are right now in 10 years, it's amazing. It's a very steep ramp up. To what do you owe that success?
Well, I think, first of all, we probably could have gone faster and we decided not to. One of our clients is a guy named Dave Ramsey, who maybe you've heard on the radio before, the talk radio guy about managing debt. And he taught me the saying, we move at the speed of cash. So we didn't grow unless we had the cash to grow the firm. And that let us grow commensurate with our experience rather than just taking off, going out and raising some money, which we probably could have done pretty easily, and trying to blow it out fast. So I think learning as we go, I think a commitment to scalable, repeatable systems has been big. I think that really focusing on our team culture. When you interview with us, we've tried to flip the whole, like we're the worst at talking people into coming and working for us, right? Everybody thinks you want to work at my firm. We actually spend interviews trying to talk people out of coming to the interview. Let me tell you why we are crazy. Now, if you're our kind of crazy, you're going to love it. If you're not, you're going to go crazy. So being committed to hiring people that are of a similar cultural set of values and interviewing through those values and then onboarding through those values and even firing people through it, that's given us a glue, that's given us a real, kind of a leg up. I also think, if you've read Outliers, the book is basically all these success stories tend to be people who are at the right place at the right time with the right proposition, and we just sort of fell into it.
So at what point did you shift from you doing the majority of the work towards having people carrying the bulk of the...
Yeah, I think at first we probably functioned, first was just me, and we were actually interviewing, we got hired to do an events manager search. Like, I know what that is, but it was for this large crusade ministry that goes all over the world with 50,000 people at an event, and they need somebody to run the event. I'm like, I don't know anything about it. Yeah, but you know us. So figure that event thing out and then hire based on who we are, which is our value proposition is figuring out your culture and hiring. And so my brother-in-law was an event manager. He was running the Houston Texans games. He wasn't in charge of their win-loss record, so that was good. But
or their drafting.
But he was in charge of the event, and so I said, why don't we interview him and find out what are the certifications, what are the things I should be asking. We got about halfway through the interview, and Adrian starts elbowing me and says, "Quit talking to him. We need to hire him." And I think the the job description Ben got from Adrian when he first started was, Ben, imagine yourself carrying a big bowl behind William, and he's going to spout out all kinds of ideas and promises and things, and your job is to walk behind him and catch all the... So that's how we started. And then we hired some people that could do searches, but then maybe the real shift for us was when we said, consultants will not sell work. So none of our consultants sell searches. In fact, if they're with a client says, well, yeah, we need another search done and this, and this, they immediately punt them back to our sales team. And once that water started to part, it made for a whole different game. Because we had a team in Houston that was in charge of this. Our clients never had to worry that our consultants were trying to sell them something else or upsell to another search or a higher level. And it was unintended. We just went that way because I liked selling. I could find people who could do the searches, but I needed to do the persuading. Once that separated, then searches started getting handed off. And then when we made a key hire to do a kind of an EVP of sales and then an EVP of consulting, and said, look, man, our biggest danger is I can outsell what we can deliver. You build something that's scalable, repeatable, and you develop the dashboards to show me when to slow down. That's when it really started to shift.
That's very interesting. And the sales, I think many of you might have caught that. And that's one of the things that on my first meeting with William in his office, it immediately triggered, because we're taught to sell and execute. And that's like the vertical alignment of the typical search consultant. So do you think that what you're doing is replicable to other sectors, or is this just something that has everything to do with the fact that it's such a unique niche?
Yeah, well, there's probably a little bit of everything in that answer. I think some of it is limited to, we're in a very particular, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever sold in my life, because you've got, we serve 150 different kinds of denominations. We serve, every kind of socioeconomic, every kind of ethnicity, different languages, and then different theological beliefs. And this isn't just like what we stand for, it's like what they would die for. So, it gets pretty serious. So that part, I don't know, is replicable. I think some of what we've learned, just by default, about segmenting sales, about content-based marketing, about providing thought leadership, I think is totally replicable in an industry. But I think had we tried to be all things to all people, it never would have worked. We had to stay right where we were, and early in our time working, we got asked to do a lot of consulting. So we thought, well, maybe we should open a consulting practice. And we brought in a friend of ours who does high-level consulting. She's with Bain. And she said, most of our work is trying to convince people to stay in their lane and not try and over-diversify. And that was a pretty key conversation. It led us to say, all right, we're just going to do this and go after it. We've had to develop, if you ask me front-facing, we say we're one company. Inside the company, there are three for the three different types of size of client we serve and level of search. But I think staying in the lane, what's the old saying? There's riches in the niches.
Well, I think that this is an example of that. If anything, there's.
I don't really want riches associated with our firm, so please don't tweet that. But but I think what I've learned is, you can't be too specific, and when you think you've bored down and said this is a specialty and we can't get any more specialized, you're probably wrong. To hear that one of the panelists said they used a firm that specializes in AI searches, I'm like, Are you serious? So I think as we think forward, our biggest challenge is we're getting asked by companies to do searches now, and our question is, do we branch past the church? Do we open a whole separate thing? Do we stay focused? And the consistent answer so far has been stay in your niche, go deeper, and because there's just a big market in every little niche.
So who's your competition? Are you competing against somebody? Is there any other search firm that is in your space?
Probably the same competitor you guys have, Client's Pride. I can do this on my own. I don't need you guys. That's number one, right? That's the competitor that we're writing against when we write content. Mm-hmm. If there's another competitor, there are people that emerge after we've kind of created this industry. I don't know of anyone who's retained. So you have some contingency, you have some, mid-level stuff that's going on, and I'm convinced that anybody can do 3 searches now if you've got enough friends on Facebook, So a lot of people think they can go into search and do 2 or 3, but building a scalable, repeatable, we hadn't seen that yet. It's funny, I got a call some years back from a Russ Reynolds. This tell you how much I don't know about search. I thought, what is Mr. Korn and Mr. Ferry, and I thought it was Mr. Russell and I didn't know, okay, it is Russ Reynolds, and he is actually alive, and wanted us to find a pastor for his church, and I'm like, dude, don't you have people that can do that? He said, no, you guys are focused on what you're focused on, and since then he's pushed us towards several partners in different churches around the country, so it's interesting to see that even within the industry, there's respect for the specialist. Mm-hmm. And I would bet there's more respect in the specialties that our firms collectively represent than you'd imagine.
So the first thing that came to my mind when we started analyzing 300 searches a year was just like with any client that we might have, there's a certain critical mass that has to be achieved before somebody can write you a check to find them someone, right? So how big is that market? I mean, it certainly has to be much bigger than what I would have imagined. How many candidates are you dealing with? How many potential clients?
New candidates on a weekly basis, and so we've built a different mousetrap, right? We do zero cold calling to clients or to candidates. So it's very rare for us to reach out cold. We've built kind of a dual system of funnel where you have clients who are attracted to us. I think 96% of our contracts last year were from people that came to us and said, please help us, rather than us going and knocking on doors. And then candidates, I think every week we'll see probably 650 to 700 new candidates come to our system. Yeah, probably half of those are on Mondays. But Sundays are hard on pastors. We just say, you know what? Call us back on Tuesday. It'll be all right. But it's and that number keeps growing. So we're pretty sure we have the largest database of pastors in the world now. The only people that might have more are the people that work with Cambridge Analytica, but that's a whole different. I'm actually not kidding, but it's on that side, it makes for a whole different proposition with what a researcher does. Mm-hmm. Like how do you cull through that? A lot of what we were hearing in the IBM speech was so helpful to me personally, because it's like, yeah, no, we really do have 700 new people. How do we parse that like that? And I think that as we continue to expand, we're seeing that we need to think bigger within our niche. So you say, how big's the client base? We'll do 300 searches this year, but there are 360,000 churches that are just in the Protestant church, just in the United States.
Wow.
So now how many of those can afford a firm and all? That's a whole different thing. But then you go global. I mean, the church isn't even growing in the United States. Go to Sub-Saharan Africa, go to Australia, go to China. That's a whole different thing.
So I'm trying to imagine your off-limits restrictions if you have such a high percentage of the market. And you mentioned something that clicked when you said no cold calling. Then, if I may ask, what is your go-to method to be able to funnel 600 to 700 candidates per week into your system? Hire
really great people. We're building some proprietary software because we couldn't find any that worked. Sorry, guys, in the back. We didn't, no offense. We didn't, for the particular weirdness that we are, so built software, built scalable, repeatable systems. And we're really strange in that we, like the chat bots with candidates, mm-hmm. I'm having to wrestle with that because for me, for a long time, our number one source of new business was candidates who interviewed with us for a job but did not get the job. And then they would tell another church that's looking, oh, well, those people treated me like a human. They took care of me even though I didn't get the job. And so candidate care has been a big push for us, and how we scale that going forward is going to be a puzzle. We have to figure it out.
Wild guess, but I think 80% at least of us would have the same opinion on the chatbots, and I think we've all wrestled with the whole telephone assistant thing when you call into customer service and you get the voice equivalent of a chatbot.
PBX.
Yeah. So
it's terrible, and it's cheap and inexpensive and all that. Maybe there's some things we can do with it, but our biggest play has been into technology. One of the ways we get people to come to us and trust us is just build great things, like this book on culture that mm-hmm. we wrote. So, we talked about, before you talk about your particular cultural values, you need to figure out, are you a toxic work environment or a healthy one? And so we did a bunch of research, and we found 8 key areas that people need to excel, and we built a proprietary assessment. I think it's theculturetool.com. You can go to, and it's a free, you can do it personally, you can have your team do it, you get a paid report, but by the time people come to us, whether they're a candidate or a client, they've already consumed so much of our content, and we track every time they consume any content. So once I have your email address, I can tell you everything you've ever done on our site, and how often and how frequently, and we've built an internal scoring system that will give me a score for you to tell me how likely you are to move to a new job. And then I'm not bothering you if you're happy. And if you call me on Monday, I say, don't call me again until Tuesday. It's going to be okay. But if you got a really high score and, then, hey, you want to have a conversation, it starts to happen. Same on the sales side.
So you mentioned that there's two, you've got the sales group,
Yep.
and then you've got the consultants which are executing the search work. When you talk about building the brand awareness and the blogging and the videos, so who's doing that? Is that reputation falling on the sales guys or the consultants that are
Everybody.
interacting? So it's everybody across.
Everybody has a content quota on their head every year,
Okay.
including me. So it's just the way it is. And we've passed on some really great people who could not produce content. And I don't, maybe it's an infographic, maybe you're not a writer, maybe you help produce the podcast, maybe everyone contributes to that. That's just part of doing the work. And that probably means I could have a better team if I wasn't such a grouch about it, but it's been, I think, essential to our success.
So how many of you guys think this is amazing?
What was the question?
How many of you guys think this is amazing?
Oh, well, we really
you might
are.
not see it from the inside, but it's
I can tell we are running out of time, but we were sitting in lead team a while back, and we hired a strategic planner to help us figure out, okay, the next, 18 months, 24 months, what's the best way to get from here to the next thing? And he was asking our history and the turning points and what's been really great over the years. And somebody pointed out something, another, and he said, it sounds like y'all like to take risks. And one person on our lead team said, yeah, Doug, we're just really good at jumping out of the plane and building the parachute on the way down. And then another woman on our lead team spoke up and said, actually, Doug, we're just really good at jumping out of planes. So we don't have it all figured out. We're trying to learn as we go. And coming to this has been really helpful. I not to shamelessly plug you guys, but when I was trying to create an industry in a new place, joining here was a big part of gaining credibility. It was like, oh, it's like the Bar Association. I'm like, yes. It really did make a tangible difference to us. And we were in a bootstrap phase, so writing a check was not, I still am allergic to overhead, but it has been worth it. So thanks for letting me be a part of things.
Well, William, thanks for the openness, the conversation, and we'll open up to some questions because I know that just like me, I'm sure that many of you have questions to ask. Eileen.
So I'm just curious about the assessment, William, on these pastors that you're recruiting. I mean, it sounds like you do most of your search work for Protestant denominations.
Most.
Okay, so who does the assessment around kind of the fit of the congregation, the level of spirituality? I'm sure
Right.
you must do lots of kind of scraping on the outside to find out, is there anything out there that's going to haunt us?
It's more in depth than you have to start with the search committee. So how long is a sermon? Like some people, it's better not be more than 17 minutes. Other people, I'm not fed unless it's been an hour. 8 minutes, we're in and out. That's good stuff. Yeah, so it gets back to some of this, the regulations that are going in place in Europe, the Cambridge Analytica. We collect enormous amounts of data about our candidates and ask them on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you on women in leadership? He-Man Woman Haters Club, everybody's equal, where are you on this? Where are you on alcohol? I mean, like stuff that you probably don't even have to, it's, well, they made us stop the waterboarding, but, we have gone to, and maybe this is industry standard, but we have gone to, you're going to sign a release telling me that you've told me everything that you're supposed to tell me. And if there's anything that would cause you to not get this job because of something in your past, you have disclosed it to me, or you're just flat out lying to everybody. And maybe that's something that everybody, I don't know, is that something everybody does? We have strange clients.
Well, yeah,
So-
I don't particularly do waterboarding anymore.
Yeah, but I think we're learning as we go. I think we, like building out a profile like we saw in the IBM presentation, that can be done to some extent with everything, but there are 100 data points for every, where you might have 5 in one place. Ours is so much more art than science. And I'll have a better answer in 20 years.
What kind of positions do you fill? I suppose that...
What positions?
Yeah, they're not all pastors, right?
Yeah, no, and I should specify, it started with just churches. It's now turned into like large relief organizations that work all over the world, drilling wells in Africa or whatever the thing is. Child relief funds, Christian schools, colleges, but predominantly it's Protestant churches. Predominantly in the U.S. I think that's just because that's where we started. I'm speaking next week at the largest Catholic conference there is because we've done some work for them. So, like you'd guess, all full-time. They've all got to be, our average fee is nowhere near like what probably the average fee in the room is because pastors don't make the same as, other folks. I mean, but so if there are 3 companies, one would be churches 4,000 and up, average Sunday attendance in the Protestant U.S. There are 404 of those, 208 of them are our clients. They're very different, and that might be like what you would call VP level searches. So all, not middle management, but upper management. The other 2 companies are more like the pastor for the church. And then you get into, are you dealing with a type of church that has bishops, and how do you deal with the bishop, and then, or is it congregations, or is it, so it's just very different. But usually pastors, now the church, the really big church has gotten really specified. We were hired to do a property manager search for a guy that would oversee all 12 campuses of this church, had to have all these building certifications, and believe that the earth was created in 6 days. I'm like, sure, I got that, no problem. There are 2 of those people on the planet, and I can find them both. So it predominantly pastors for the church, as you would think of a traditional role, but it's a lot more varied than you'd imagine. Yep.
Hi, thank you. Can you speak a little bit about this separation of sales and consulting? When I think about the process that we go through with a potential client, oftentimes the client wants to see who's going to be leading my search.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're figuring it out as we go. Okay, so where we started was, I love selling things. I always have. So I would take all the sales calls. And we weren't doing any outbound. It was all coming to us because we'd stumbled into this content-based marketing. So I'd handle the sales calls and then push it off to wherever it went. And as I've learned over the years through friends at Salesforce and HubSpot and other sort of entrepreneurial companies, founders who are CEOs who love sales, their critical flaw usually is they wait too long to hand off the sales process. And I'm like, uh-oh, that sounds like me. So when we finally said we're going to hand this off to this, how are we going to do that? Well, my best consultant, been with me longer than anybody else, he could not sell ice in the middle of the Sahara Desert. He is a great consultant. And I would send him to a sales meeting and we would lose the work. And like with no competitors, we would lose the work. So it's like, this isn't working. Love you to death, man, but you do not get to talk to them. And that's sort of how we stumbled into call William, let him do the sales, and then we'll send Jay to do the search, and it'll be fine. And I'd say that if you're in the room. He's heard me give that spiel before. That sort of fell into a really nice thing. Our clients do not want to be sold anything else once they're signing what they think is a rather large check for an unknown value proposition. And so many of our clients, we've never, they sound like I felt the first day I went to counseling. I've never done anything like this before. That's what the clients will say. And so they're nervous as can be. And what we found just by default was by saying your consultant is not allowed to sell you anything else, it just deflated the pressure in the room. And it made me say, okay, what if we split this out? And we had to come up with a whole different comp model, which I think that's what I tried to pick your brain about when we first met. Like, how do you do this in a way that is a meritocracy where everybody shares in the growth of the firm? But it started by default because I love to sell and our other person wasn't any good at selling. And then we found that with our particular client base, it relieved pressure and it just caused the relationship to be much more congenial. It also, what we found over the years, has all but eliminated the whole, which consultant do I get? I want William to do the search, all that kind of stuff. 2 years ago, David walked in our office and said, well, that didn't work. And I said, what? David's a new sales guy. He said, well, I know we're trying to get you out of doing search. So I was talking to this church, and they want to do a search, and their founder's retiring, da-da-da-da. And I said, you don't want William to do your search? And they said, why? And they said, well, because we're going to upcharge you an extra $30,000 on top of our fee for him to do the search. And they said yes. So that didn't work. So we got completely away from that. And the salespeople have their own way for comp. The consultants have their own way. And then we have my accountant won't let me call it profit sharing because then you have to issue K-1s and all these things. But everybody grows when the firm grows. So there's a comp model that rewards people for doing good work. That may be something that's just specific to us. That may not scale out for everybody. But in our world, it's made a ton of difference.
And is the sales team maybe a third and the consultants 2/3 in terms of I'm just thinking about
Number of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Selling it shouldn't take
That's
as long
probably
as
about right.
the conducting of the search
Yeah,
work.
that's probably about right. I mean, now we could probably hire a couple more salespeople and grow faster because we can't field everything that's coming in. Like we've had to do, like we have personas, like types of people that we're dealing with, and we measure sales cycles based on, is it committee member Carol or is it Pastor Paul? And we track all the data so we know this kind of church dealing with Pastor Paul, it's been 96 days. If it goes to 100, this isn't going to happen, drop him, because we've studied it long enough. But we could probably do more business if we actually hired more salespeople. Right now, it's probably a third, 2/3, like you laid out.
Last question, sorry. So when your sales executive is speaking to a potential client, does he or she have total reign to decide whether or not we'll take the search, whether or not we can conduct this search? And doesn't the client say, I want to meet the person who's going to conduct my search?
I didn't hear the very last part of the question. I want to meet the person that's going to do the search?
Who's going to conduct my search,
Okay,
not
so
just you, the sales guy.
If I heard that right, it's a couple different questions. First of all, the head of sales, who I did turn things over to, Sarah, a woman who has not worked in a church, I have told her, you have a direct line to me, and we have ways of communication where if she needs me right away, she can send kind of a 911 text, and it doesn't matter where or when, I'll answer. But I've told her my default is I'd rather you have to beg forgiveness. I don't want to micromanage. When you start screwing up, then we'll have a conversation about, giving away too much. We have also built an internal scoring system, much like what IBM has built, to say it's this kind of search, this kind of church, it took this long to sell, so we have an internal grading for degree of difficulty for the search. And Sarah also has a dashboard of all of our consultants and how their work is going and and there's a, like a red, amber, green sort of meter for each of them. So she can see pretty quickly, is this feasible or not? And that's a lot better than it was 2 years ago, and it's going to look primitive in 2 more years. So does that help? On the meeting the consultant, it happens every now and then, especially as we've had a couple competitors try and pop up. But we've found that a Skype works just fine. Very little on-site sales visits or on-site, here's your consultant. We've been lucky. I've told our people forever, I want to be like what I think Goldman used to be. I don't care who's managing my money. It's with Goldman. It'll be fine. I want to be like that. It's a brand experience and not a personality-driven thing.
Two questions. You said everybody produces content. It's 2 questions. The sales team and the operational team produces content, and where do you use that content?
Yeah, so you can see so the content will be everybody employed by me, okay? And that would be from administrative assistants to interns to senior consultants to salespeople to anybody, including Adrian. She's got a content quota on her head. Don't really know what to do if she didn't meet it. Probably just say, you're so nice. The quota is on everybody's head. If you go to Vanderbloemen.com, again, just spell it however you want into Google, you'll see our free resources. You'll see the frequency of the blog posts. You'll see our podcasts, you'll see webinars, you'll see things like this culture tool. So it's widely varied. It all drives back to the pain point of, I need help finding somebody. So it's not just willy-nilly content. There is a system to it that drives people back to their own realization, I need help.
Do you have editorial review?
Sorry?
Do you have editorial review?
Yeah, our marketing team does editorial review. In fact, our marketing team now, we get a little more sophisticated every year. We're still pretty new. But this year, our marketing team came back and said, here are the 5 pain points we're going to hit. Here's the strategy for the type of content we're going to use, length of a post, how do they link to others. And then they make themselves available once a week in our break room, which is a rather large space, to help people brainstorm ideas. And then people submit an idea, okay, great, and then they submit their content and their guidelines and that sort of thing, but figuring it out as we go.
Just a couple of questions. In reference to your fees, are you a third plus expenses?
Yes.
Right. And then also when it comes back to the comp, the breakdown of the incentive, would it be between the sales and the execution? Is it 50-50? I mean, obviously the execution is much harder, takes longer. I mean, how would that get broken?
Well, there's a couple answers. I mean, as an owner, there's the first answer of we want the firm to be at a EBITDA that's healthy, not greedy, but not giveaway, right? So there's that. And then once that's cleared, and we know as a firm we're making the margin that would be considered healthy, then we want to compensate people commensurate with how much they're causing the firm to grow. And every year that changes a little bit, and it's probably more arbitrary than it ought to be. Our sales team, we've finally gotten to a place where there is somewhat of a commission-based, you sell this, you get that, because salespeople just work that way. But fundamentally, we try and pay people a base they can really live on, and then some degree of sharing of the growth if and when that happens. We're pretty conservative in our budgeting, though.
But is it somewhat of a commission-based model for a specific search?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
Somewhat. It's a little more complex than that, but somewhat. So, but no equity, no non-voting equity. We don't do that. Just cash.
So you mentioned a couple of questions that.
We answered the first. I want to know whether it was a third, and they do expenses.
Okay.
Yep, 1/3 and expenses. And we've recently gone to. We've gotten so tired of expenses and truing it up at the end, and do we give them money back or charge them more? That we're going to try for the next year or so. Just here's what the expenses are going to be. It's just flat. Deal with it, and we'll see how our clients respond to that. I know a lot of firms do that. Others don't. I don't know what our client base will do with that.
I mean, when I was speaking about expenses, I didn't mean direct expenses. I mean the indirect expenses.
Yeah, mostly direct expenses. With some of the more traditional models I've seen that have a lot of indirect expense, we don't pass that through to the client, but some we do. It's a little different every year. Yes?
Hi. When the salesperson makes the sale, does the consultant get to meet the meeting so that the consultant can get a grasp of what the culture is?
Is the consultant what?
Oh, can you repeat the question?
When the salesperson makes the sales, what happens later? Does the person that will do the consulting work get to meet the client so that they can get a feel of the culture of the client?
Yeah, sure. So the head of our consulting or consultants works pretty closely with the head of sales, so that when the contract is signed, we'll then we have a bunch of dashboards, like it's a senior pastor in Elkhart, Indiana of a church of 1,000 and they're Baptist. All right, who is not redlined as a consultant right now? Who's done a senior pastor search recently? Who's been in the Midwest? Who knows this particular theological tribe? Find the best match for that, and then it's just assigned to the consultant. I don't know of a time that we've had a consultant say, I don't want to work with them, and we've had to... But then the consultant does go there. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
one thing.
Then we did just one other thing we added about a year ago to try and repeat business is hard for us. So really big churches, we have a lot of repeat business. But the church of 300 that asks us to find their pastor, I hope they're not calling us again anytime soon, because that's the one position that means he bombed out. So for the larger churches, we did put an account. I guess you'd call it account management person inside the sales team that checks in with them regularly, sort of client care. And that takes that off the consultant as well.
Oh, we've got Eileen in the back, somebody?
Yep.
I do mainly financial services, New York, but across the country. So I'm really curious, and I'm sure a lot are here too. What's the range of what a bishop to a pastor would get paid across the country? And what would be your, yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
what would be a minimum that you wouldn't do?
Yeah, I'm not real good. Like I'm driven by the idea that the church should have a tool accessible to it at least as good as what the business world has. So like I'm all about helping the church move farther and faster. That's like personal mission for me. We drive that home during an interview process so people know when they come work for us, this is not just about a P&L. And we do some really dumb things sometimes, like take a search where a pastor's not getting paid much. We ask for, remember the brick church in North Carolina? We ask for the total budget, of the church so we can get our arms around everything. They sent us their budget, and they sent by snail mail, and then they sent us another piece of mail later saying, oh gosh, we forgot to include a big part of our budget is the annual chicken dinner that we have. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is a big part. So minimum fee, we have, Adrian and I, some internal decisions about what we'll do and not do, but we don't turn people away if they're good people and they're good to their people. You guys probably found this, the lower fee the search, usually the higher degree of difficulty the search is, right? That's not always true in our industry. You get pastors of little country churches and it takes a long time to sell them, but then they behave and they do what we ask and it closes fast and they're happy. And so we're still figuring out like cost to acquire a customer, cost to execute a search, where are we under or over water, and there's probably a little bit of Robin Hood going on where a bigger search is sort of making a smaller one possible. Does that make sense?
Yes, but you didn't answer
And the range,
question.
the range, of what a pastor makes, it depends. Some of them, like if we do searches up here, the first clients to hire us outside of just highly entrepreneurial churches were churches outside New York City, because the churches were filled with executives that work in here and use search firms in their companies all the time. So, if you're in Rye, New York, you're not buying a house if you're a pastor. Church owns the house. So then the comp gets squishy and weird, and how do we get paid? And we have to go to like Zillow and figure out fair market values of houses. And so it's just a wide swath. And we've spent a decade, like we have all of the compensation info you can have about pastors now. So.
I'll take some pressure off of William because we had this conversation, but the specific compensation of pastors is somewhat of a sticky subject with a nonprofit, and I know this is something that doesn't come natural to you, so I'll just take the pressure off of him because it's not easy to bring that topic up, especially when there's recording going on. Eileen.
Okay, I'll back up.
Have you created linkages with some of these seminaries
Yep.
around the country?
Sure.
And as a result, do you find them to, are individuals who are coming out who may not have had pastoral responsibility, are those individuals that you place? So that's my first question. Second question is, have you seen more women in your field?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let me go backwards to the question. Women was interesting to me. Like internally, Sarah was the best salesperson there was, and she learned from me, and I'm not a good teacher when it comes to sales. She literally put her desk next to mine for 6 months and figured it out. I know, but I had an internal gut check, like, will our clients respond to a woman salesperson, right? Absolutely. So there's more receptivity, I think, than we've ever seen. I've seen more. We get the calls. We want a female senior pastor. Okay, that's not easy to find, right? And it's growing, but slowly. The old line about the church that I love is, the church is great at raising the flag at sunset. So, we tend to be a little bit behind, and I think it's catching on, but it's still behind. And we still have clients that say that's just not how we read the Bible, and we won't do that. And I'd rather serve too many churches than too few. We probably have some churches that think we're serving all the liberals, and others that think we're serving all the conservatives, and whatever. And then the first question, the seminaries. We've developed, like we'll go teach courses on how do you bulletproof your marriage before you go into your first church. Like things they're just not getting in seminary. How do you run a staff meeting? We have an online coaching curriculum that's very affordable for new graduates, where they actually get a certificate, like I've learned the basics of how to build and run and keep a team, whether it's volunteer or paid. And then we've started, probably more and more I'm seeing people lean away from seminary. So we've worked with denominations and networks to develop partnerships where we develop training content that's specific to their particular environment. It's made for some nice partnerships. Yeah.
So we'll make this the last question so we can move into the
Yeah,
the next
no one
segment,
wants to
although
be the
it,
last guy before cocktails. I'm not keeping anyone from...
No, well, we still have another hour session to do an open forum, and this is a great segue because I'm sure that these topics will come up. But
just curiosity, William, have you ever been offered to do work out of a spiritual fee or something similar?
Out of what?
Spiritual fee, pro bono.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
pro
you know,
bono, but
like,
not pro bono, but I'll give you something that is not in this world. Not in this material world.
The golden ticket to heaven for
no, I thought of
a
the
search
pro bono,
well done.
We were, so you guys, you live this life. You have 8 bajillion frequent flyer points, right? And no time to use them. So every other year, Adrian and I go away and burn all the points to the ground. And we were in Italy 5 years ago this spring. And we planned it a year earlier. And we thought, well, we'll go to Florence and then we'll go to Rome. We just sort of set the dates. We went, we hired a tour guide. We end up being in Rome when the Catholics are in conclave to pick the Pope.
Oh.
Right? It just so happens. We were shopping for, I think, a leather coat or something or another. And I had a tour guide, and we saw Adrian turned out and looked outside, and there were these nuns in full habit running down the street. We're like, I think they're about to pick a pope. So we run over to the square. Our tour guide gets us right up to the front of the line. We're the first people in line, and everybody in front of us was some form of clergy. And we were there for evening prayer with the new pope, which was really cool. This was 5 years ago, so think social media 5 years ago. Instagram was pretty new. Posted a picture of us with the white smoke that said, "It always feels good to finish a big search." And that would have been pro bono because he didn't get a salary. But yeah, I think our Catholic friends still think we had something to do with that.
So I'll take advantage of being up here to make the last question. Because you just reminded me of this with the interview. You have everybody concentrated in Houston. So I assume that your percentage of face-to-face interviews is quite low.
No, for a final slate of 4, 5, 6, a short list for candidate, we see every one of them face-to-face. We tried to do virtual, and it failed miserably. Because we thought, if we could do virtual, we could cut travel costs, we could build a better mousetrap for smaller churches. It was horrible. It just, maybe we didn't know what we were doing. We shuttered it. We had this giant theological takeaway. If virtual really worked, Jesus would have Skyped it in, so rather than actually coming here. So no, now we will bring people to Houston quite often, which is kind of cool because you get a lot of different people getting an impression of a candidate and not we're just flying to their place. But yeah, our people are on planes a lot. So
that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you so much, William. I think
thanks for letting me.
This was a great conversation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.
So I really greatly appreciate William's openness to be able to have this conversation. The next part and the last hour of our boutique forum is more of an open environment. So it's open conversation about the challenges that we face. And to get it kicked off, though, if you're like me, there's a lot of things going on in your head right now. And it's primarily, is this applicable to what I'm doing? Can I replicate it? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? So my first question to you to start this open conversation among us is, what is the biggest golden nugget that you take away from this conversation within the context of what you're currently doing in your practices? Any volunteers?
just the emphasis on content with a specifically, I thought, really interesting niche for everybody in the firm has to write. That I've never heard.
Anybody else? I'll tell you mine while we get this microphone, but I remember this cartoon on an Instagram post where there's this warrior with a bow and an arrow, and he's getting ready to go out, and then there's a sales guy with an AR-15 trying to push it, and he's like, no, I don't have any time for that right now, I'm going to war. That kind of comes to my head every time that I hear William saying that they're putting a lot of time into developing the firm and the tools, and our natural tendency to put our client service first and then firm development last, up until the point where 20 years have gone by and we look back and say, whoa, there's a ton of things that I have to do. So that's my golden nugget, figuring out a way to be able to refocus as an owner on developing the firm from a systems perspective versus focus on our client work.
I think it was very interesting talking about the bridesmaid candidates that don't get the placement, because we certainly know we do get those opportunities, but I'm not sure that we've been focused on them in the right way. And could we treat them in such a way that they feel that they are friends with us forever? And we certainly tell them that the time they've invested with us will hopefully be rewarding in the future because we know them better and we'll consider them for future opportunities. But somehow I feel that there's more there that we can build with them in a more consistent way, probably through various content and digital presence and footprint as a boutique firm. So I want to chew on that nugget for a while. Thank you.
Anybody else? Is there anything in what William just presented that you feel you might be able to go into the office and make you change something? You're going to change something, William?
I'm going to change something, yeah. No, I would just say if my VP of marketing were here, she would stand up and tell any of you who are CEO, owner, people in your firm, that the content strategy would not work if I didn't write. Like, it's speed of the leader is the speed of the team. If I weren't producing, now I don't do as much content for our site. I actually write for Forbes now quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But if I weren't managing that speed, the team would not follow it. It can't be something you're issuing as an edict. At least we've not found that. So.
Well, I really loved it. And I'm going back to my office. Are some of the values, but it's nice to hear somebody who's done so well that has the same. And I wrote down about culture and values, to stay in the lane. There is riches in the niches, candidate care, and the content concept. I really found it fantastic. And something else very important about the Skype meetings. We also had failures with Skype meetings in important jobs. So in this digital area, I think this is something to reinforce, and also the presence of the people in the company, not a home office and everybody. We were speaking with Kate about this. It's another synergy. It's another value of culture that you can make with everybody in the office. So thank you very much.
Bill.
Thank you. I've been trying to struggle how to sell to new clients without them knowing who the lead is. And I'm thinking that they think you're just like them, that you're all in the same tribe, and therefore it doesn't make a difference who it is. At least in my work, they always want to know, well, who's the lead, how they're going to do it. And it sounds like you don't have that discussion. You're shaking your heads no. That's correct. So there's something about your niche that's really unique that lets you do it. And I'm just...
Yeah, it didn't start that way. Pastors are the worst old boys club there is. They talk to their own. I'm one of the club. So, okay, William's believer. We know William. He's been a pastor. Da, da, da. That changed as we upped our content game. And we no longer we write to 4 individuals, and they're Pastor Paul, committee member Carol, staff member Sally. If you ask the people in our firm, they can tell you what kind of car Pastor Paul drives, why he's emailing us on Monday, what's keeping him up at night, that his student pastor's over budget, that his worship pastor doesn't show up to work until noon. Like, we just get inside what's the pain in their life so that we can write as if we are reading their mail. And that takes commitment to. It's one thing to get content out there. It's a whole other thing to get it focused around 4 or 5 personas and be ruthless in staying just on the point of those personas. And I think that's what's enabled us to have, our controller wrote a blog article that our people ate up, and she's never worked at a church, and she's a CPA. I mean, how do CPAs write anything riveting? You really don't want anything riveting from a CPA, right? But it works. And I think the other piece of that, and I should be quiet, but regularity. Like, everybody says they're going to write a blog and all that. If I had a nickel for everybody who started and didn't finish, it's frequency, just regular frequency around personas. And I think it's gotten us around the having to be one of the members of the club to be listened to.
So how many folks here are considered specialists? How many of you consider yourself a specialist within the search practice? So the rest, generalists. So for the generalists, do you see any advantage or any nudge towards considering specialty? Do you see any advantages? Javier, what would you think about?
I'll see a lot of advantages. The problem with many other markets, especially where I am, there's no critical mass in any of the industries. Sorry, that. I see a lot of advantages, and I consider myself in one of the areas in which we do search that I know much more than in other areas. But the critical mass in the market where I am doesn't give us, I guess, myself or anybody else a significant amount of searches to survive if we were just to focus on a niche. We have more churches in Mexico City than probably we have in Houston, but unfortunately,
but they have a single boss, right?
They have a single boss. They don't.
It's hard to sell.
Yeah, they don't branch out.
So any other generalists that feel that there is a market constraint and that's the main reason driving the philosophy? No, not at all. Jesus?
Well, we are in an even smaller market, which is Venezuela. So it's tough to be specialized when you are in a small market. But even though if you get a certain size, like we reach in Venezuela, you can be a generalist firm with a specialist consultant. So even though we are generalists, we serve all kind of clients. We try to keep some of our consultants focusing consumer goods, industrial, oil and gas, and so on. But it's trying to get the best of both worlds.
So before we move on to the next topic, is there any additional golden nugget on the presentation from William or the generalist, the specialist dichotomy? No? Okay.
One final.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys and want to learn best practices from you all. We don't look at us and say what a success. One of the secrets of our success is every one of us at the firm is not in it for the money. We're in it for a cause. If you want to make money in search, do not try and help churches. The money is just not there. But if you can find the why behind the what of your particular niche, I think it'll motivate your team. That's really helped us a lot. But I look forward to learning from you guys and appreciate you letting me be a part of things.
Thanks again, William. So once again, going back to the whole disruption technology and wrapping up on what we saw today, the first speaker that we had was Susan from IBM. She gave us some practical insights of things that are happening today in organizations regarding technology and analytics and AI. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, Do you see that technology being propagated into other companies? And the second question would be, how is that going to change our value proposition? And do you think that's a real threat, or do you think that we'll be able to evolve gradually into this new world? Man, it's hard to get people to talk right before cocktails and after a long day.
I will go on the second aspect of your question. I really believe that if there is a job in which the human part is important, it is our job. And you can go 1,000 times more in technology. I think that there will be always a place for the human part of the relationships. And this place is our job. So I am not at all frightened of the technology. I think that we will ever adapt, ever.
Any other comments or observations on what we heard from Susan? I mean, we heard the bot comment, which I think we all share. William brought it up, but I think it's pretty pervasive.
Yeah, it just makes me remind, like, year 2000, I was finishing my first postgraduate degree, and I interviewed a lot of senior people in executive search about the threats of the web pages and that time Monster or any of those technologies arising in that moment. The conclusion was more or less what you said. And then we leave it again with LinkedIn, that we will disappear. Like 5 years ago was that discussion in these forums, and now we're talking about the artificial intelligence. And I think that that is a discussion that's going on every time disrupting technologies appear, but there is always place for the human there.
Well, I'm a big proponent. I mean, most of you guys know, and if you were here last year, you'll know that I'm a big proponent of AI. It gets me excited, but I do recognize that the more data is out there, the harder it seems to get to be able to contact people, because it's even though we know who is out there and where they are, to get them to pick up the phone, it's just a tremendous effort. We see it a lot in the U.S. Many times, they pick up and treat us the same way as if we treat somebody selling us something, a credit card company or something. So yeah, I have to agree that the human component is going to be even more important than it was in the past. And it's very interesting to see Susan mentioned the concept of augmentation, and that's really the way that I see technology. It's going to be more of what I describe as the Iron Man suit, but you still need to have the human behind it. My only concern is there going to be an Iron Man suit that will not be readily available to everybody? And because somebody back here mentioned the concept of, is there enough data? I mean, IBM can do it. Johnson & Johnson might be able to do it because they've got hundreds of thousands of employees. But what happens if you really don't have that data mass to be able to use it in the same way that they do? Javier.
Well, the fact that when people ask me why companies still engage us to this search, and my answer is basically because we dedicate 24 hours a day to do it. Whereas the companies itself, they don't have that kind of resource to dedicate to one job so much time and effort. And I agree with him. I was mentioning to Christina at the break that in 2000 I went to a conference in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. Was coordinated by ERN, Executive Research News. And that was when Monster, Hot Jobs, and all those were there. Mm-hmm. And I told my wife, going to Las Vegas to see how my job is going to disappear. And 18 years later, we're still doing the same job after LinkedIn. So I don't think it's...
And most of those disappeared, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. In less than 2 years, most of them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because that was just about 4 months before the dot-com bubbles
Mm-hmm.
exploded.
I was just going to say I probably have the least experience in the industry of anybody here, so I have a little bit different perspective. And I worked in an industry where I witnessed technology, broadly speaking, not necessarily AI, basically make the rich get richer, and a lot of people get pushed out of the industry. And that doesn't mean in our industry just like, you know, the big 5 firms. It means, you know, there was a tier of boutique players who, you know, were able to figure out best practices and gain market share from smaller or other competitors. I think it would be interesting to see tomorrow with the bigger firms, what they're doing with technology and how that impacts us, because that opens up a whole nother world. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, everyone asks me about technology. I mean, who we deal with. So, you know, we have private equity backed firms, we have venture firms. We don't have so many of like Fortune 50 type companies, but, you know, speed seems to be of the essence. You know, quality seems to be of the essence. And again, I think it's augmentation, but it's almost, I think it's going to be table stakes at some point, and not, you know, just to get in the game. So, again, I saw it from a different industry's perspective, and I think it's going to happen faster than people expect, but I don't think it's going to eliminate our role, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I'm very confident we won't get eliminated, specifically because, you know, this is a human game. And again, my guess is that the more data that is out there, people might think that that's what's going to make them successful in acquiring talent. But I think it won't take long to realize that nobody wants to speak to a bot for, you know, more than a couple of seconds, and we get frustrated with the, you know, get me an agent, get me an agent, get me an agent kind of thing when we're on the phone. So I think that's the advantage that we have. Last year, when I was in front of you and I was talking about disruptions and AI, my biggest concern, just follow up on this, was Korn Ferry and the fact that they had purchased Hay Group and they were coming in with these very big, very connected solutions that would potentially be an Iron Man suit that we would not be able to acquire. And just to follow up on that, you know, in the last year in interactions with clients, it seems like it's been beneficial for us as boutiques, especially with the mid-sized, the mid-cap companies that'll fall between the 100 million and the 3 billion, because most of them will tell us, you know what, yeah, Korn Ferry was in here, but there's no way we can afford this whole thing, because these guys are out there now selling and trying to get clients that will, you know, be at least $1 million client during the year. And I think that's really opening up opportunities for us. And at the end of the day, the volume in that middle market, I think it's really where we're going to be the most impactful as boutiques.
I completely agree. I mean, we talk to the HR departments of the mid-market companies. They're not investing to this level. They're kind of ignoring the HR systems and things. And so we do see a gap there, definitely. But one of the things that I was thinking about, getting back to some of the earlier comments, is that we do need the scale, right, to invest in some of these systems. So it would be very interesting to see from AESC, if as boutique firms we could build a scalable size as a collective group and leverage somehow this technology as a group, you know, be it through Blue Steps, through other systems that we're using as preferred vendors. It would be very interesting to see how we could use the power of the organization.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Eileen, and then we'll pass.
No, I was just going to comment that several of my clients use Korn Ferry for assessment work, and it is clear that the wall comes down with them doing both. You know, so they'll say to me, we can't use them for search, and I only use that. I know I shouldn't bring up specific firms, but you know, they have such a strong presence within their Hay business, their leadership assessment business. So I've never really looked at that. The other thing is that probably a good 30 to 35% of my searches are from clients who have either been trying to do it on their own or they have used some other mechanism. And so I think, you know, that it's never scared me, and I don't think it should for anyone here. that firms are trying to do it on their own or they're using different types of technologies. I just think that there is a market, and as long as we're adaptive to change. How many changes have we all seen over the past 15, 20 years? It's been like every 2 to 3 years that there's a different iteration, and we've all had to adjust. I mean, to me, right now, the market outside, this disruption throughout our world is really what we're all dealing with every day. That's, AI is fine, but that's what I think we're dealing with. So it's just a comment, really.
Are you saying that Korn Ferry's acquisition of Hay indicates that the leadership consultancy, which all the others are doing as well, is not as anticipated successfully?
I need to be very cautious about that.
But I mean, because
But in my personal experience and based on my expectation of what I saw as a big monster coming together, it has not been as scary as I thought it would be with our clients. Because I thought we would get that wall built. Because when Lominger was around, just without the Hay acquisition, that wall was already up there. And with the Hay acquisition, I thought, well, these guys are just going to take over the market, because once they corner the leadership side, they're going to want to see the same tools and the same type of products. And that's what I've been getting. And Eileen mentioned the savvy buyers put a wall between two businesses. And I've had 3 big public companies tell me, yeah, we're doing search with you because we decided to go with Hay. And as much as the regional head of Korn Ferry is coming in to push us, we feel there's a conflict of interest and we don't want to mix the two. And that's something that was just completely unexpected, at least on my end, when I heard about the Hay acquisition. And it's getting a little bit more aggravated with the KF Advance offer, where now they're charging candidates, and it's getting a little bit more sticky. But again, this is my personal opinion. Disclosure has nothing to do with the AESC, and that's just my observation.
because we did research on what those 5 are doing, and there is no unique difference, to my astonishment. I mean, they all do the same thing. Or did anybody else? I mean, we're researching as well as including leadership consultancy, but
I've always said that, as much as any of us would like to talk about our competitive advantage, at least within the retain world and everything that we do, we're very close. I mean, it's more about the difference ends up being about specific client preference more than just saying, I've got the magic pearl that's going to make me different. And I think that's the case with. I'll use Shrex if we can't use specific company names.
It's a conflict of interest within Korn Ferry. The client won't have. I'm sorry, I'm not naming anybody.
Well, okay, this is what our clients have told us. They don't. If they say, if you come into my company and help me with organizational development and help me deal with the way the company is structured, and you're the one that's telling me that I need to hire people, it's.
And include in that executive assessment.
Right, and then executive assessment, they
include executive assessment where they have access to all of the information, oftentimes at the top levels and 1 and 2 below. So that is a conflict of interest.
So a few things. We did a survey a few years ago, which we're going to repeat in 2019, asking clients, would you use your executive search firm? I'm sorry, I should turn around this way. Would you use your executive search firm for these other services? And I was really surprised at the numbers. I wish we had asked it 10 years before, but we are going to ask it again in 2019, so we'll have an interesting time span. But what when you could either say yes, no, or maybe, so. But what I was surprised at is that maybe 25% said no, and the rest either said yes or maybe. And to me, a maybe is just, a yes that hasn't happened yet. And so I would only say to you that a number of firms, even in this room of all sizes, are doing both executive search and leadership advisory services. And I think that clients are very open to saying, you are my trusted advisor, you understand my business and my culture, and I'd like you to do these other things for me because you get me. So I wanted to just say that, not to say that you won't find clients who don't want to do it that way, because 25% of them said no.
Yeah.
But I will say that the number that said either yes or maybe was much bigger than the ones that said no. So just as you think about how you define your future business, I think it's important to think about that. Then going back to a couple of other things that were mentioned, since I have the mic, just a couple of things. One is, I thought what was interesting about the Vanderbloemen presentation is that if you had asked me, not knowing anything about their organization, what it was like, I would not have said it is a technology-driven sales culture. Because I would have said they look for ministers. I mean, like, well, you know, they're just probably have prayer meetings in the morning and then they go out and look for ministers. You know, I would have had a bias in my own mind on what kind of business that was. And I thought what we heard was this really pretty amazing technology-driven sales culture. And so I would simply say, for those of you who think that technology isn't going to have an impact on our business, if it is driving an incredibly successful ministry business, I assure you it is going to have an impact on our business. So I'll say that comment. The other thing I would say is, we heard today about some of the really cool things about IBM and scale, and so actually I think that's an intriguing point to think about. I actually talked to the IBM woman afterwards and said, you know, all of our members are too small. Even the biggest members are small. I mean, the whole profession is small. But maybe we could, you know, could we do something at the association level? So we're going to explore it. I don't know if the answer is going to be yes or no, because it could be that it's just going to be too expensive. But it's intriguing to think about it, because I do think we're too small. It's a very small profession. And then the only thing else I wanted to mention is that when we think about technology, and I'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow, so I don't want to tip my hand, but when we think about technology, we think about all the big brands that everyone knows, but the number of startup firms in the technology space that could be valuable for us and that could be value enhancing for us rather than disrupting, I think are extraordinary. And that could be an area where AESC could also provide a lot more information and education, in segmented areas on, who are the startups to watch, and how can this technology enhance what we do, rather than, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about LinkedIn, which was, what people said to me 3 years ago when I joined. So watch the space. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening. And I guess my last comment, because Arthur's standing there, and if I don't say this, he'll get mad at me, is we're doing really cool things in both Blue Steps and Executive Career Services. And that is centered around candidate care. That is really a solution for you to use for yourselves, and it's part of your membership. And so if you don't know what I'm talking about, what a great way to have a follow-on conversation. Arthur, raise your hand. He's happy to chat with you over cocktails.
If I may, and I think probably I'm the only one that's going to say this, I do think that our profession is fundamentally interrupted right now, and I don't think any of us really want to recognize how much it is. Recently, I went through the value chain on the search side, and there are technologies today that would substitute somewhere between 75 and 80% of what we normally tell our clients we do. So I think it's not a matter of, is it happening, isn't it happening, is it big firms, is it small firms? The technology exists today. What I do think is what we can do as individuals and as humans is that 20% that we need to focus on. For example, when we go in to take a brief, there isn't a bot in the world that can listen to a client, interpret where they want to go, understand what's out there in the market, what they really need, instead of what they're asking us for. Management consultancy. And when it comes down to helping a candidate actually decide where their heart is right now, a bot's not going to do it. We can. And when it comes to the carry-on care afterwards, it's a human touch. But I think if we continue down the route of, no, technology doesn't substitute, yes, of course it can. And yes, it does. Facial recognition, a number of different things. So my belief is, one, yes, as smaller firms, how do we access those enabling tools? Stefan Spang, who is our new non-executive board member sitting on the board of the global board of the AESC, is helping us vision that, and I'm looking forward to what Karen has to share tomorrow. I also think it means that beyond search, what we're doing advisory is very much a fundamental part. It's going back to the basics, and that's what clients will pay for. I am saying this as well from a firm that about 50% of our income is non-search, and it has been for the last 15 years. Yeah? So actually, I think we need to embrace opportunities. There are things we need to let go because the bots are going to do it much better, much faster, much cheaper than we are. Finding a formula that we can use as boutique firms and use that to leapfrog to the next stage and actually hold on to the management consultancy piece, which is where search came from 50-some years ago.
So I think all of us at some point within our search practices or managing our firms sit down and think, I wonder what my colleagues are doing or what somebody else is doing regarding X, Y, or Z. This is the golden opportunity where we've got 100 colleagues in the same room and we're engaged in an open conversation. So my question to you right now is there something out there that you think we, as your colleagues, would be able to respond to? Any question on, what are we doing? How have we confronted this? What keeps us up at night? Anything out there?
Last year, I was very intrigued last year about your story about data and comparing a human resource manager with one company X and company Y. How are you on that research?
As far as the AI applications that we're developing, we are very far ahead, and we're launching in June. And what we're doing, for those of you that were not here and what we discussed is, last year when we spoke about AI, and even this, I think it's been clarified even by the IBM presentation, but a year ago when we spoke of AI, many of us thought of just something that will allow us to search, and like search bots and do candidate identification. And the application that we're targeting is actually being able to identify patterns where we just don't see any pattern. So that's where we're applying the artificial intelligence. And the HR example is essentially we're collecting profiles of people that share the same title, just to be able to identify what are the underlying elements that have made them successful. So that's the different approach, and that's just to be able to contribute to our clients information that they would typically not have, and information that they will typically not have if they don't have the aggregate information that we are able to acquire. Now, my only concern after all of that has been the risk of GDPR and the potential privacy laws that will limit our ability to accumulate data in the US, because Europe is getting complicated. If this goes the way that it has started to go this week, I think we're not too far. And going back to your point, Krista, I don't think that we will be able to not get impacted by technology. And I keep using this Iron Man suit analogy. The person needs to be inside for it to be the complete package. But if you try to fight with someone that has the suit and you don't have it, you're going to get screwed. And I think that our two biggest challenges right now is, one, whether or not the technology is going to be easily available to everybody. Because just imagine a situation where we talk about LinkedIn, we talk about Monster, we talk about Career Builder. The common thing about those technologies was that it was available to all of us. Think about somebody that has exclusive access to LinkedIn when you don't. And that is the risk. That's if there's somebody that could be able to monopolize a highly effective tool in that manner, I think that is the the risk that we run. And then the other risk is that regulatory environment will eventually limit the data. But on that one, I'm not sure if that's actually going to benefit us, because if it limits the big data accumulation, that it really levels the playing field for somebody like Korn Ferry and us.
Will you keep going on that, on what that looks like?
On-
What does that suit look like? What would it do?
I think it's a combination of tools that are already out there. For example, you mentioned the chatbot, right? That they said, let me upload the resume. And we didn't see it, but there's artificial intelligence in the background just trying to identify how that resume matches up with certain patterns with everybody else in that database. And there's typically patterns that we're not looking at. Certain things like it might say, you know what? Might have not noticed, but 80% of the CFOs in the US don't come from the accounting background. And there's a high percentage that are actually chemical engineers. And the most successful ones went through 3 or 4 international assignments. So the AI actually sifts through this and gives you patterns that it would take us a very long time just to be able to go in and identify. So that pattern generation beyond our typical title and company and dates, I think it's going to be crucial if we have enough data to be able to come up with those. Because if you go in to a client meeting, and this is the example that I use with some of the tools that we're developing. Let's say we go in and we're recruiting for a CFO, and I've got my AI background motor in the background, and the client tells me, well, you know what, I want a CFO with this, and these characteristics. And I've got AI in the background running, and I'll tell him, okay, well, listen, just based on this, this is the potential universe of candidates that you might have. This is potentially how much it's going to cost you. This is probably where we're going to find them. And all of this information starts coming up in real time versus going in and saying, well, tell me about your position, and then I'll come back in 3 weeks with some research that will start iterating on whether or not it's feasible or not. So that's one example of using the AI. Another example, and this is a live app, and it's called, it's an interview app. And Korn Ferry is developing its own app, and we saw it last week at the data analytics forum that Hans Gallen did. So the guy is interviewing in real time. How many of you have seen this? Okay, so there's a screen, and they're doing it live. So a guy is speaking, and then you know how if you use Facebook Live, you see these bubbles coming up with different likes and whatnot? Well, you start seeing bubbles that say, uncertainty. There's a potential lie, and it's the facial recognition that's telling you feedback real time. So you're interviewing somebody, and you're getting these and that's available for Korn Ferry. Korn Ferry has that app to help people train themselves for interviews, because the feedback on the training mode is, you're taking too long to answer. Pause, you're repeating these words too much, you're showing uncertainty, you're showing fear, you're showing contempt. I mean, it's just this, it's an amazing tool. So, those are 2 examples of some of these tools that, if you have them, you're in. You get to apply the human side to it. But if you don't, it is literally like fighting an Ironman without the suit.
Hi,
Bill.
I had a pretty prosaic issue, not as high as yours, and it has to do with getting good, consistent client evaluation information. And what prompted this, about 2 months ago, I got a call from a client who had paid their bills. Everything was fine, but they said, we should have called you during the search. X, Y, and Z wasn't being as responsive as we wanted to. I'm so ashamed, I should have called you. The equity person in our firm left. So the person who didn't do good work had left. They called out of the blue. I'm not sure what prompted that. And then I said, I need a system so I can get some reliable information from everyone in our firm. How well did it do, other than did they pay their bills and the person stay? And I've talked to about 5 or 6 people around, and nobody has a good solution. So I was hoping, does anybody, so the issue is when, who does it, and the form of the evaluation at the end, in addition to do they pay and someone stayed. Anybody have an answer on this one?
Is everybody clear on the question? No. Okay.
Okay, client evaluation, anybody have a good solution other than did they pay the bills and the person stay?
No, is it a good client or is it not a good client?
You don't know.
Are
my client, my staff person, did we do a good job?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Other than
I
they
think they're-
paid and the person stayed, which I decided was not enough.
We
I'd love to hear that.
We audit our clients at the end of every search, and so we have an individual that we hire that will audit all of our clients at the end of the search. We talked a little bit about it this morning about extending that maybe even to the candidate to understand what their experience was, and we use that to then say, do we have a satisfied client, and more importantly, is our process good, and do we need to improve that process?
Is that an outside person or someone from your staff?
Outside. Our clients? Yeah. They're very happy to do it. And we get some very meaningful feedback back from those clients. It's not all, yeah, you guys were great and you did a wonderful job, although a lot of it is, but there are some critical elements that come up in those audits that we then discuss internally, what could we have done better? There was an issue that a couple of our clients brought up in terms of the communication aspects. We've always been very good at communicating, but we almost were over-communicating because we had 3 or 4 people talking to the candidate, giving instructions on what's the next step. And the feedback from the candidates was or from the client was that it's somewhat confusing as who's doing what over at CareerSmith. So we kind of addressed that internally and streamlined that better. But that's a very effective tool, in my opinion, on how did you do on the search, and is there anything you need to do differently about how you execute your search based on what your clients or the feedback is.
Yeah.
That's
that. Phone, or is that done through SurveyMonkey?
It's done by phone. It's an actual person calling the client, spending anywhere from, we start off with 20 minutes, and oftentimes it goes into 35, 40 minutes.
Yeah, we tried SurveyMonkey, and the response rate was like 5%. So we do it by phone, and what we do is we simply ask 2 questions. And the first one is, and it's a third party, and nobody involved with the firm. And the first question is, what did we do well that we need to keep on doing? And then the second question is, what annoyed you that we need to stop doing? And that's it. I mean, because we first tried, a longer questionnaire because we wanted to know all of the details, and it wasn't as effective. It really wasn't as effective. No, it's not a firm. It's an ex-HR person that is retired. And he's well known within the client base, so it's easy for him to just kind of be a little bit independent. Getting close to his 70s, so we find that his approach is very unthreatening to clients. So it doesn't feel like we're trying to get information to go put a knife into somebody.
We use a retired colleague as well, but we actually do reach out to the candidate pool, and we also take it a step further. We reach out to a reference as well. So it's a full 360, and the feedback is really helpful. So.
Anybody else? Any other golden nuggets out there about the conversations during the day? Anything that you would like to bounce off the rest of the colleagues?
So when I do that, I actually am the one that calls. I will pick up the phone and call the client, and if it's a board, I'll try to reach as many board members as I can to get their feedback. And when they say something good, I will ask them if it's okay if I quote you on that, and then I flip it back either onto my website, or I'm running some promotional material on conferences that I sponsor, and I use their name with their quote, and I'll write it up and email it to them. Here's what I heard you say, is that right? And they'll reply yes, and I get a confirmation that I can run it in that particular publication. So that I found helps out a lot.
We do a similar thing with testimonials, where we ask our clients to write one for us, and we use it in our marketing material. We host breakfast events, and we'll have those testimonials come up on the screen prior to the event beginning with the clients' names and their titles and that sort of thing. So it gets us the people that have loved working with us. It helps us promote for future business. We also ask people for the negative feedback as well, which we use to help change our process and evolve and be better at what we do. My question is around assessment. We're based in Vancouver, Canada. We're a small boutique firm, 16 people. Our clients are asking for assessment all the time now, and our big competitors in the marketplace are largely the global firms. We compete against them all the time, and they have it as part of their service to their clients, whereas in the last probably decade, we've referred that business out to a group of industrial psychologists who are excellent. They charge a lot, and we're kind of tired of just referring tons and tons of business to this firm and getting no value back from them, so we'd like to be able to provide something internally. So my question to the group is if there's anything that any of you have found that works really good and isn't overly complex. We find a lot of our clients just want, they don't know a lot about assessment, and they just want to be certain that they're having it as part of the process to complement the executive search that we've provided.
Is it a selection? Is it are you doing it for development after the person is hired, or are you doing it as part of the selection process?
Really selection.
So I think, you have to have it validated in some ways, unless you're just really looking at personality profiles. I mean, you could do a Hogan on the candidate, and they have a product that's $150, which is really inexpensive, versus the full scale, which is close to $500. It's just a thought, but I don't know. I think it's a little bit. I guess we could talk about what you're looking.
I think for us, the Hogan might be a solution that's quite simple if our client isn't willing to spend a whole lot of money, and that's what we're looking for, is something that's, if they have a budget of $500 to assess the 3 finalist candidates, then we can work to do that, as opposed to having each of those 3 finalists go to a industrial psychologist who's going to bill them $4,000 for each candidate.
See, I think of Hogan and that test as being helpful as the person enters the organization, because there are possible derailers. And it sort of, looks at your value structure and the way you work day to day. So it's almost like a roadmap for your new employer. The derailers, somebody could back away if they see something, person's super excitable, whatever. I don't know too many companies that use it as a full-blown screening process for hiring, unless it's along with something else.
Do you think the Hogan's a better tool than McQuaig?
I think they're different.
I think they're different.
I think they're
although I don't
different.
know that much about McQuaig.
Is McQuaig is it a similar psychological?
It is.
It's a Canadian firm.
It's a Canadian firm. Okay, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
I like it already.
Stefan uses it, and at IMD we've used it.
Yeah, we use Hogan a lot, and we use McQuaig. What I like about McQuaig is that you can use it to profile the role, so you can index the candidate testing to a profile, and that's pretty helpful in terms of, the saying, is there a match or not match or partial match? That's an extra layer, I think, of data that I don't think Hogan does as well.
And we've used McQuaig together on the front end. So they've got this suite that at the beginning, during the pickup, there's a couple of questions that you ask the hiring managers, and then it points you towards the profile that they're looking for. So it ends up adding value during the kickoff, asking the right questions that are related to personality that will give you a benchmark, because then, I think the default is that that's done online. What Stefan taught me to do was just do it over the phone, asking the questions through a presentation, so we could ask for certain clarification, so it becomes much more engaging than just telling someone, hey, just go do it online. And then once you put it into the system, it also provides interview guides based on the personality profile of the person for the client. So I think it's much more tailored for search than Hogan. My experience with Hogan, and we've used the $150 test a couple of times, we've stepped into some landmines with them. Where clients just kind of got scared about some things that were popping up. I think it's a bit more complicated to understand, and if you don't sell it correctly, it could potentially get you into trouble if you don't know how to defend it, which is what has happened to us with Hogan. If you have a consultant that doesn't truly deeply understand it, it's like giving a kid a gun. It could backfire.
You really do need to be certified.
Yeah.
I use Hogan in my coaching practice, and I'm certified in Hogan. So you really do need to have that understanding of how to deliver that information.
Yeah. What got us into trouble, just to clarify, Eileen, we used a third-party industrial psychologist. So he did the assessments, and then we included the assessment with our reports. And then one of our consultants, overstepped in the candidate presentation, and he started to interpret the results. And he's not certified. And that was a black eye for us. It didn't come out well.
You could get certified in Hogan in basically 2 days.
Yeah.
Which is surprising to me when I looked into it. I thought that seems very surface to be able to interpret these very, very complex.
It depends how deep you want to scrub, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Hogan is really thorough. McQuaig is a lot more superficial, but it depends how deep you want to mitigate the risks at the end of the day. What's great is that it's turnkey, from beginning to end, which many tools aren't. They're used at the front end or at the back end, but not linked.
Yeah, the biggest blow up can occur when you do the basic course, and then you have an HR manager that is really deep in it. That's where you're going to get into trouble. But anyway, that's our experience. I love McQuay. I'm a McQuay fan.
We also found a tool called Acumax a couple of years ago that we started using, ACUMAX, and it measures the hardwiring of individuals. So particularly around collaboration, work processing, structure, and social interaction. Some really good things that we found for developing the position profile, as well as interviewing questions around drives that are hard to sometimes discern in those first couple rounds of interviews with the client. And then we also use it for team building once the candidate's onboarded. And that's been really, really well received. Candidates love it because it takes 10 minutes online to do. We get the results immediately. Surprisingly, the candidates find that it's very non-threatening, so the candidates find the information really interesting. The clients like it. We don't share it till the second or third round of interviews because we don't want any biases coming into the discussion. But we were very skeptical of some of the assessment tools and how to use them, and we found this has been really user-friendly with a little bit of training from the company. So it's a variation of the predictive index and such, but again, very simple, and it's really almost a fun exercise for everybody involved.
So some folks are starting to step out of the room. If somebody has to go, it's okay. I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you to not forget, fill out the evaluations. It helps the forum and the meeting get better every single year. And on that topic, with roughly 10 minutes left, I'd like to ask you two questions. The first one is, what do you see as the biggest value that the AESC provides to you as a boutique? And the second is, what do you think we should be doing that we're not yet doing to be able to improve that value equation as a boutique member?
Thank you. These forums are wonderful. I've come to, I think this is my third one, and I learn a great deal from all of you. I would like to see us have more of this type of forum. They don't need to be in person. I would like to see them maybe bi-monthly, once a quarter, via phone, or peer groups even, so that we can continue to share this type of information and learn from each other.
Great. Anybody else on the value of the AESC for you?
Hello. I think it's really important that we have a voice that represents excellence in our industry, first and foremost. So it's great to get together and talk and share ideas. In terms of the value, I'd love to see the AESC sort of pioneering some more innovation in itself. If you talk about the whole technology disrupting our industry, why can't we get together as a group and support those startups that could help us as an organization grow? Maybe we could find their executive team or their chair and do something from an innovation hub, the way other companies are disrupting their own industries. They have innovation centers of excellence within their organization. So that would be the challenge for AESC, I think. Can we do that? Can we look at that in the future?
That's a great topic. Anybody else? No value?
I think there's value in networking. And I think there's value in the networking and hearing other points of view. I mean, clearly, our industry, like every other industry, is going to have some disintermediation. There's going to be some development. But, as we continue to grow and think about the future of this industry, hearing one another is really, I think, a very compelling and strong reason to do this. So.
Albert.
Yes, I think the issues that are addressed by the AESC, like GDPR, are definitely issues that nobody of us can address alone. And the perspective to keep on addressing the big issues of the profession are very important. That's the value of the AESC. The second one, I think that the global coverage worldwide, even if we belong to worldwide organizations, most of us, I think that having the ability to cross each organization at one place, this global meeting, is very valuable, and also in different regions, like Europe and Africa, Asia, and because we are all stick to our clients and one culture, and I think that the global vision is very important, and sharing one time in the year a topic with a global perspective is very important. So I think it's a second asset, an important asset of the AESC.
The sharing of the best practices is something that I really like. This is my first time going to this meeting, but I have been to the Researchers and Associates meeting twice over the past, I guess, 8 years or so. And just being able to go home and check out all these tools that everyone's using is really, really helpful. It's something that I'm going to do tonight after I watch the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Albert.
Again, yes. I don't want to go into a non-political question, but there are the big firms, and here we are in this boutique independent forum. I really think that as a boutique, we really need to be, all of us, engaged in the AESC body, because just imagine that 2 or 3 big firms are leaving or are going in their own organization, or there is 2 AESC, and then the strongest we are all together, the better we will be. And my concern is that as a boutique, we are as strong defending the AESC than any big organization. This is very important for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and not just defending the AESC, but defending our position as boutiques as well. You know, we discussed training and development this morning, the fact that many of the big firms have their programs, they have their talent development, and many of us multiple times a day just wonder whether or not what we're doing is what we should be doing. We lack the benchmarks or the sense of security that the big firms have. So it is very important that we take an advantage. Again, and I mentioned that the fact that you have colleagues that are willing to contribute to talk about what we're doing and help support the questions that we have, I think it's very valuable.
Jose.
Sorry, and last thing, I think that our role as a boutique within the AESC is fundamental also to help the profession. In our countries, or in some countries, in developing countries and so on, the search business has not a good reputation. You know, you have all kinds of people in your market, and it is very important for us to be seen as examples because of the standards, the client's rights, the candidate's rights, and so on. And as a body all together, helping the profession will help, I think. We have a role of responsibility to do our business the best way we can do for the future of the profession. And a body like the AESC is very important to share this exemplary behavior in the market.
So Stefan.
The best practices concept. How does the AESC enable that on a go-forward basis, or is this a coalition of the willing, of the ones who are interested in maybe remaining connected? You know, every 2 months, to sort of open up their kimonos and share what's working for them and what questions they have. How does that, for the ones who are interested in carrying on the dialogue, because I think it's going to be cut short a little bit, how does this take place organically, or is this something that the AESC enables?
What would you suggest is the best forum? Are you talking a standing conference call every 2 months?
Yeah, I think that's what you suggested, right?
I am curious if others are interested in that. I'd be willing.
And how do you get an agenda, so to speak, for that? Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of people show up on a call wondering.
Yeah, I think it has to be a moderated topic that does require a certain amount of effort to organize, because if not, we'll get 20 people on the first call, 10 on the second, and then in the end, it'll just be a one-on-one
I'm interested
call.
in it, but
We've been there.
Collectively, what the forum is and how to, because working with Jose, coming up with an agenda just for this event.
Yeah.
Coming up again with the one in September is an act of itself. And so if we're going to do this every 2 months and have it be meaningful, there's got to be some sort of a format where ideas can be thrown out or discussion topics can be thrown out so that those calls every 2 months are meaningful. I think it's a wonderful idea, but we ought to give some thought to the architect behind it.
I think you may be right, or possibly as simple as saying what's keeping you up at night, and when there's nothing else keeping you up at night, the call's over. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, maybe like you could target. I'm not sure that an agenda works when you're trying to get organic ideas to surface, because if you are going on the call, it's probably because you have either something to share or something to learn. And my hunch is there's no need to systemize that process. All we need is a moderator to open the call.
Are you volunteering, Stefan?
Well, I think you should.
Oh no, I would be more than welcome to let you.
Karen and
volunteer.
Stefan will be the leaders
Let's
of
work on that.
I just don't know how we mobilize ourselves for the ones who are interested. So I would offer myself up, and I don't want to overstep my boundaries, because I realize that this is maybe something that the AESC should do.
A couple of thoughts.
Yep.
One, on the evaluation form, I'm sure there's an open-ended question at the end. If you're interested in something like this, please indicate it. Make sure you write your name on the evaluation form. Otherwise, we won't know who you are. So if you're interested in this, write down your name. If you have some ideas of interesting topics, write that down. As a starter, I mean, we could do something as easy as a members-only webinar that is facilitated, and people can key in questions, and we can record it, and we can make it available, again, members only. I do think having it under my own view, of course I'm biased, is having it under the auspices of AESC gives you our code of ethics and conduct and professionalism, that trust that you build of who's invited and who gets in and all of those things, that it makes more sense to monitor through AESC. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, we don't do BIFs outside of
the U.S.?
This region. And technically, I think we did one last year in Toronto.
No, it was Chicago.
Chicago?
We did
Chicago.
Toronto, yeah.
Anyway, there are no other regions that do these, which is interesting in and of itself. Part of the challenge in getting it face-to-face is picking a location where people will show up. And so if you have thoughts and ideas around physical space ideas or locations, write that down as well. By the way, I'm obviously using this to plug the evaluation form, but also it'll get us a kickstart, and then maybe we could do a follow-up to see how we could get a pilot set up in some way other than, I don't want to take away from the two in-person sessions we have, but I think this is a good way of supplementing it. And maybe we could even get things hosted by people in other markets where we may not be able to go physically.
Yeah. I think that the first step is, I would encourage you to look at the breakfast meetings. Chicago was wonderful. We had a pretty good attendance, and it was very, very dynamic. So I think that would be a great step.
This is a subset, but as you think of your research staffs and what they do well and what challenges they face and what learning opportunities might exist, we can also say that the next researcher forum will be Tuesday, June 19 here. And if you'd like to add to the evaluation what you'd like to see as skills improvements at a researcher forum, please be sure to add that. I know I certainly would like to know. I'm going to be delivering some training there and want to best address the needs to improve your research staffs.
Adriana Prates.
Okay, I definitely agree with everything that our colleague said right now. And to see in person how the cultural aspects affect all regions in Americas is very interesting for us. But I'd like to highlight that to be in touch with people like Susan from IBM and Carrie, and also Bertrand Kimpe sometimes paid the trip. Thank you.
Okay, well, cocktails are waiting. Anything? Yes, well, before we leave, first of all, I think we should all give a round of applause to the AESC team. Brian, Jeffany, I mean, it's the amount of effort that's required sometimes is really underappreciated. And also Invinius, Mint, and Kluint, who are always there to support us as well. So thanks for the day, Albert. Thank you, Albert. Let's go get some drinks.